In this session, we'll be catching up with the founders of Xendit and Ajaib of Indonesia to discuss their company's meteoric rise to unicorn status and their plans in fostering digital inclusivity of Indonesian masses via their respective platforms. Our panel speakers, we have Moses Lowe, co-founder and CEO of Xendit, Anderson Sumarli, co-founder and CEO of Ajaib, Shotaro Tani, who is the moderator from Indonesia correspondent Nikkei Asia. Gentlemen, the stage is all yours. Enjoy the session, everyone.
Thank you for the introduction, and thank you everyone for joining in so early in the day. I know it's hard because it's hard for me as well, and it's probably hard for Moses and Anderson as well. Yeah, so with me, I have Moses from Xendit and Anderson from Ajaib, two of the newest minted unicorns this year. Gentlemen, why don't you briefly talk about yourself and your company? Moses, why don't you go first?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, and thanks for joining. I'm coming from Xendit. We provide payments infrastructure for Southeast Asia. We help businesses accept payments, send payments, and also hold funds in Indonesia and the Philippines. So if you're looking to accept payments for your business or send payments out, please contact us. In terms of traction, we're doing about $13 billion of payments every year. We've been growing about 10% every month since we started, and proud to be serving the nations.
Great, thanks. Anderson?
Hey everybody, thank you so much for tuning in such early in the morning. I'm Anderson, co-founder and CEO of Ajaib. We offer retail investing for Indonesians. We help people buy and sell stocks, mutual funds, and IPO. Today we stand as the third largest stockbroker in Indonesia by number of transactions, and we're hiring rapidly. So if anybody's interested, please send me a LinkedIn message.
Great. So this is about the new unicorns. As I said, Xendit and Ajaib are two of the newest unicorns minted this year in Southeast Asia. Why don't I start with you, Anderson? Can you just take me through your path to becoming a unicorn? I believe you were one of the fastest unicorns to be born in this region, right?
Yeah, so we are a young company. We started in early 2019. We spent the whole year trying to find product market fit until 2020 when we hit our first stride. In early 2020, we found product market fit, and we've been scaling all along. So I think that we were lucky along the way. We were lucky. There are several trends that were pushing in our direction. For example, the pandemic has really pushed everyone to start being more mindful about their financial well-being and kind of their long-term thinking of how they want to manage their money. That kind of shift from consumptive behavior to more of savings and long-term investing behavior. So we've just been incredibly lucky along the way.
Great. Moses, what about you? I believe you guys were founded somewhere in 2015, if I'm correct, and so it took a bit longer than Ajaib to become a unicorn. But what has the journey been like for you?
Yeah, our mission from day one is to build digital infrastructure for Southeast Asia. So the idea is that on the B2B side, we can build underlying payments and other pieces of infrastructure to help the next generation of startups and entrepreneurs really take off in the region. So that's been the journey since 2015, and it's been the steady growth of our customers and us benefiting from our customers' growth over that period that's really driven the total payments volume for us to increase over time. And then I think we're in a unique point in Southeast Asian history where foreign direct investment is greater than ever before, interest is greater than ever before. So we're able to get access to capital from all over the world, which has, I think, changed the fortunes of many of us in Asia.
Got it. This might sound like a stupid question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. How do you become a unicorn? Like, do you like set about wanting to become a unicorn? I know it's like a culmination of investments after investments, and then you at one point you get valued above $1 billion. But how does it work exactly, Moses?
Yeah, the definition is pretty simply when the valuation of your company is above $1 billion US dollars, And so it's a matter of investors being willing to invest with you at a post-money valuation around that price. So each round that you fundraise, there's a valuation set, and once it's set above, then I guess you can call yourself a unicorn.
Did you set about trying to become a unicorn? Was it just a natural progression?
I think it's a natural progression of building a large company that has meaningful value add to society. I think aiming to be a unicorn is maybe too small a goal. I think the goal for, I suspect, Anderson, us, and other companies that we serve is we want to go build something for our countries, for Southeast Asia, for Indonesia, from other markets, and the valuation is, I think, a lagging indicator of things that we're actually building on the front end. So as long as we keep serving customers and we keep growing in the right ways, I think valuation will happen behind.
Got it. I understand. I mean, you guys became a unicorn in less than 2 years. Was there a point where you were like, we're going to achieve unicorn status if we continue like this, or was it just came all of a sudden?
Well, first of all, like, we were very fortunate. We learned from a lot of folks like Moses, who actually advised us earlier on, and we're very proud clients of Xendit as well. And so, we're really fortunate because some of these companies that started earlier than us have kind of laid out the groundworks for us to exist today. I think that's the first thing we have to acknowledge. I think that the second thing is Moses is absolutely right. I think most founders that I admire, they're doing this because they want to be useful to society.
Mm-hmm.
There's a higher calling to what we're doing, right? So I think, to me, like, it came as a surprise. I think there's a lot of luck in this. I think that an entrepreneur can control a lot of things, but timing is one thing that they cannot control, and so we're just really fortunate to be born in this timing right now.
That leads me on nicely to my next question, which is it easier to become a unicorn in Southeast Asia now? So you mentioned, Anderson, the startups before you guys laid the groundworks, and now there's obviously COVID, which is accelerating the digital transition. Because of the monetary easing around the world, there's a lot of dry powder lying around in this region as well. So what do you think, Anderson? Is it easier for startups to become a unicorn now?
I think that it's easier to start a company and scale a technology company, period. I think it's a trifecta effect of what you mentioned, where you have a lot of dry powder lying around, and all eyes are in Southeast Asia now, with mega IPOs coming up from our earlier decacorns showing up. And the second factor of the pandemic really fundamentally changing how people interact and how society govern themselves here in Southeast Asia, especially in Indonesia. That's create these new opportunities and pain points for startups to go and tackle. And the last thing, third of all, is just this new generation of technology talents, engineering and product managers who graduated from the earlier decacorns, who've seen some liquidity events and are trying to find the next thing that they're going to support. I think that's trifecta effect of amount of capital out there, the problems out there, as well as the amount of talent out there. It just makes it incredibly easier today to start a company and scale it, a technology company, compared to just about 4 or 5 years earlier.
Right. Moses, what about you? What are your thoughts?
I think those factors are exactly the right factors. It's easier partly because there's a lot of dry powder, but I really think it's a function, and the same thing happened in the US and other markets around the world. Once the infrastructure exists, whether that's regulatory infrastructure, payments infrastructure like us, logistics, whatever infrastructure depending on your business, cloud, you're now able to start and grow a business very, very quickly, which then allows you to be able to get to whatever valuation you want. So yeah, I think those are the right factors.
Got it. I mean, COVID, as I said, was one of the main drivers of digitalization in Southeast Asia. I was wondering if you, starting with you, Moses, do you think, obviously people who didn't use digital services started using digital services in COVID. As Southeast Asia tries to get out of this COVID lockdown and everything, do you think people still continue to use digital services?
100%. I think what we're watching is systemic changes in secular trends in society accelerating. When you look around the world at countries that have opened up, let's say the US, the kind of e-commerce that's gone online has stayed online. I think a lot of investors and companies in the valley assumed that this would be kind of short-lived, but you see the change in behavior as a secular trend, not a blip on the radar. I think that's similar for us too. We're in Southeast Asia, we're a little bit behind others in kind of opening, but I think we'll follow something similar where we have fundamental changes in how our societies work, and where people were maybe late adopters of technology, they've been forced and they can see the benefits of it. So we see that in the number of customers looking to go online, number of merchants, number of entrepreneurs starting. I think we're seeing systemic changes in the world.
Got it. Anderson, COVID obviously has meant lots of people staying at home, and I think you've benefited, Ajaib has benefited from that. But as people start going back into office, their time will obviously be taken up more with commute and general work stuff as well. So Anderson, do you think, after COVID, Ajaib will be able to keep this extraordinary growth that you experienced during COVID?
Well, I think I agree with Moses that I think that the changes that we're seeing here are fundamental shifts. These are not trends. These are actually what we call like a revolution, at least in the way that we've seen in Indonesia, how retail investors have really dominated capital markets, where it's never happened before in the history of Indonesia. I'll give you an example, right? Because of the pandemic, you see a lot of banks in Indonesia driving down the interest rates. And that creates this behavior shift where customers are looking for higher yielding asset classes for them to put their money in. So that part will be a trend, right? It's not really going to sustain for years to come after the pandemic. But what will sustain is that because of that shift in the way that customers think, they're now thinking, all right, I want to open up a brokerage account. And why would I ever even want to interact with anybody in person or go to a branch, let alone talk to anybody? Like, I would just want to do it the way that I buy stuff on e-commerce or the way that I order food on food delivery. And that is here to stay. It's just accelerated by the pandemic. It wasn't caused by the pandemic. So things like that, we believe are like fundamental shifts. It's here to stay. We also happen to believe that the way that we work is going to change fundamentally. So we in Ajaib, we're going to be adopting a permanent hybrid work from home and from office policy. I don't think the way that we work will ever be the same again, even after the pandemic recedes.
Got it. Just wondering if there are any merits to being a unicorn, any perks that comes with being branded a unicorn. Anderson, have there been any anything that came your way because you are a unicorn?
Yes, now there's a lot of people applying to us, so that's great. The more great talents, the merrier, because we believe that that is the most important part of building a company.
Moses?
Yeah, there's definitely some positives. I guess we wouldn't be in this call if we weren't. So there's one benefit. But I think there's a flip side to everything too. And I think in prior times, I think we were automatically self-selecting for the right kind of people. We have one of like the highest Glassdoor reviews of all companies in Indonesia. So people had to find us, but when you found us, people really would love us and stay. Whereas now we have lots of people applying, which is good, but there's a lot of people we therefore need to reject. So there's good and bad with Unicorn. My inbox is more full than ever with spam. So there's some. But I think the overall benefits are pretty large in terms of being able to get the side of folks and being noticed in the right ways and being easier acknowledged by customers that we're an entity and we're here to stay for a long time.
What about in talks with investors? Does becoming a unicorn, obviously that means a lot of investors have come and invested in you. Does that mean, more investors beget more, further investors? Is that how it works? Moses?
I'd say there's a slight element of fundraising momentum, maybe helps with future fundraising momentum. But I think investors care about, or rational investors should care about returns. And so they care more about that growth rate into the future and what's that future potential, that IRR that they can receive from you. If they're investing in $1 billion, that means that they think they can get, being an investor, 3x or 10x on that number. And so the higher the valuation, the more that you have to be able to prove that you can build the revenue base or the business behind it. So I think that's how rational investors view the world. I say rational because there's lots of irrational investors in the region too that make different decisions.
And you talked about talent. Obviously, one of the problems that Indonesia has had is lack of engineering talent, which has been talked about in the industry for years now. Can you just take us through before your hiring process before and after becoming unicorn? So did no one apply to you guys before you were a unicorn, and now you're suddenly getting an influx of applicants?
Well, I have to say though that it is a myth for someone to say that there's not a lot of engineering or tech talent in Indonesia. There is actually, but you need to work really hard to go and uncover them and convince them to come on board. And folks who say that it's difficult perhaps doesn't have a strong enough mission to pull in these folks, right? But what I would say is that now it's easier to convince folks to come and join us from other fellow unicorns and decacorns in the market, whereas previously it's just a bit more difficult to perhaps attract them to come in.
Got it. And have there been any challenges, difficulties in being a unicorn? Those of you talked about the flip side, but more like tangible difficulties that you encountered, more responsibility maybe. Anderson? No,
I actually think walk into the office every day feeling the same way. I think that we were very cautious as we build up the culture in a company, even throughout the internal announcement of the unicorn status, that this is just a number, right? I mean, we do benefit from the perks of being able to attract better talent, which is a great thing for us, but our mentality is always still like, we're just 1% done. There's still a lot of things that we need to prove ourselves on.
Moses, what about you? Maybe there's more scrutiny from investors as you become a unicorn.
I think that's a function of just maturity as you go through the funding rounds and you get closer towards the kind of governance and processes you need for being a mature business with like predictable revenue or other things like that as you approach public markets. So I think that discipline is naturally there. Unicorn is just kind of one other milestone along the way in that journey. I think for us, the hardest thing is really being able to filter people who are missionaries versus mercenaries for the longest time, because it was so hard. We did such little press. We found mostly missionaries, people who really cared about either infrastructure or the company and what we were trying to build, versus now there's a lot of people who are joining us. I heard someone tell me, the reason I want to join is because your growth is so big and your momentum is fast, which is a terrible reason to join us, because one day when it's not fast, that means you might leave. What I care about is when people used to say, hey, I heard you're building a great company with a great culture. I heard that you're trying to build and enable infrastructure for the next batch of entrepreneurs in Southeast Asia. That's the kind of people we want. So I think the flip side is we have multiples of applicants, but it also means multiples of trying to filter out really good intentions and from the bad ones, and keeping the culture that we have, I think, is probably the biggest change in how we've had to approach recruiting.
That's interesting, because obviously recruiting takes a lot of time, and if you get more applicants, that's going to take more of your time. Does that kind of hinder your growth?
I don't think it hinders our growth. I think applicants are good. It just means more time weeding out and a harder time testing for some of these nuances. We realize that as we get higher up, people get more suave in the way they do interviews. So just distinguishing from right intentions and not is fairly difficult. Something that we do, which is a bit unique, is we do something called a trial day, where we force everyone to work with us for a whole day. They have to take a day off work or work with us on a public holiday or weekend. But we get them to work on a real problem with us. And it's kind of a reverse set of interviews where they're asking us questions to solve a problem and they present at the end of the day. And we found that helps us predict not only whether they'll succeed, but within which quartile performance they'll be within the organization. So we found that as a very useful tool, and we do that till today.
Anderson, does Ajaib have a similar system of weeding out applicants?
Yeah, I think that I think every company, through the trial and error and pattern recognition, have found what's the right fit for them. Like for us, we've We've kind of boiled down the way that we interview anybody to like, the 5 and 6 traits that we've seen through pattern recognition that is the most successful candidates walking in the door. I agree with Moses that being able to weed out people's culture fit is a lot more difficult, especially if you go to more and more senior people, because like these folks are like professional interviewees already. They know how to go through difficult questions. And so I think in a similar path, what we do is that we give case studies of real problems that we probably just solved last week to these candidates, and we try to have them walk through the way that they think about solving the problem. And for us, that helps us peer more into how we're going to work together with them, how are they thinking about things, if they face the same problems that we do, how are they going to solve it. And I always tell candidates, I want to welcome you with open arms, but I also want you to come in as well with open eyes. And so it also gives them an opportunity to look at what kind of problems that we're facing and to see whether that gets them excited.
Got it. I just want to move on to the general unicorn scene. So I think by one metric we've already seen 19 unicorns in Southeast Asia as opposed to 19 unicorns this year in Southeast Asia as opposed to, I think, 21 from 2013 to 2020. And I think of the 19 unicorns minted this year, something like 4 or 5 were Indonesia based, including you guys, and a couple of others that counts Indonesia as their biggest market. There's obviously this massive trend of digitalization and whatnot, but do you think Indonesia will see more unicorns, Southeast Asia will see more unicorns going forward? Starting with you, Anderson.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's going to be a dozen new unicorns in Indonesia by the first half of next year. I mean, it's not going to stop here. It's 250 million people. There's just so many things that, so many challenges that young entrepreneurs can tackle in Indonesia. And again, that kind of trifecta effect of, a lot more money, better talents, as well as like bigger challenges, is really going to be breeding grounds for the new generation of entrepreneurs.
Right. Moses?
Yeah, it's such an easy yes. Southeast Asia is going to have a lot more. Indonesia is going to be a big driver of that just by function of macros. I think that has to be true. It's a super exciting time. And I don't think there's a better time to be building a startup. When you look at countries around the world or regions around the world, you see that players in kind of this first 10 years, 15 years of a region's development tend to become the biggest companies and most valuable tech companies in that region, whether it's US, China, or India, or other places. So there's a unique time in history to be building some of the most valuable companies in the world. And Southeast Asia is a great place to be. We've got the right macros for it.
Got it. The reason why I wanted to ask that is because we recently saw the IPO of Bukalapak, and we are obviously going to see a GoTo's IPO, and they're unicorns, decacorns. But they kind of had to wait a long time to go public in that the market wasn't really ready for their IPO. But now Bukalapak IPO has shown that there is a pathway for tech companies in Indonesia to go public. And obviously IDX is trying to put more tech companies on their stock exchange as well. So do you think, the stock exchange becoming more welcome of these tech companies? Does this mean like, startups, they perhaps go public before they become a unicorn? How does this trend play in with becoming unicorns? Moses, if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, I think the decision to become public is a very personal one for each founder. There's a bunch of different dimensions why one would choose or not choose to go to public markets. I think it's super exciting that the regulators and the infrastructure, kind of financial services infra, is now more than ever willing to support unicorns or public markets. So I think either direction that founders choose both will work. There's a case to be made for public markets at smaller size. There's a case to wait. Those are very personal decisions, but I think the region will continue to support both types existing.
Anderson?
Yeah, we probably work hand in hand with the Indonesian Stock Exchange and the Indonesian OJK, or equivalent of an SEC here, just by nature of our business being an online stockbroker. We're here to support the new generation of unicorns, or even before they become unicorns, to go public in the Indonesian market. What I can say, looking at our numbers internally, is that we know there's a lot of excitement from retail investors, young investors in Indonesia, to participate in the gains of our unicorns or decacorns. To the extent that with Bukalapak's IPO, like, we supported more than 50,000 out of the 90,000 retail investors who bought on their IPO stocks. And I expect that number to go further up and up as more and more of our tech giants in Indonesia going to do dual listing in both the local stock exchange as well as foreign stock exchanges. I think that the shift there is just, it's you know, we have to give a bit more credit due to regulators as well. It's not just the fact that they're pushing for new IPOs, but also the fact that, you know, the OJK is pushing for regulation around dual voting rights. So they're just creating new regulation to make entrepreneurs more comfortable to IPO in the local stock exchange.
I guess where I'm coming at is, does, you know, at the end of the day, does, you know, being a unicorn matter? Do unicorns really matter? Like, is it just, you know, one metric for a company, or does it really, you know, have some, you know, we talked about the perks and stuff as well, but does it really matter to be a unicorn? Should we take note of unicorns? Anderson?
I think it really depends on the entrepreneur. It really depends. I can tell you that in our company, when we did the internal announcement of the unicorn, the mood was that this is great. This is kind of like outside in validation of the hard work that everybody has done, but it's 1% of the way. Let's go back to work tomorrow. That was kind of the mood. And so it was just it was a blip. But I think the reaction to it really depends on the entrepreneur.
Right. Moses?
You're talking to two people that come from the Y Combinator school of thought, which is build what customers want. And we care very little about what the valuation is today, because we care about the long run value we're bringing to society. So we're both going to have very similar views here. It was largely a non-event. It was a big event for our PR team, but non-event internally. I think I see one of the anonymous questions being like, is it the right measure of the startup success? And it's not. We see plenty of unicorns that go bankrupt. So to me, it's some validation, but it's what I came away every day is what Anderson says about us, or what a customer says about us. That matters way more than a number that is pinned to our heads today.
Got it. And yeah, let's move on to the questions. One of them, with spectacular valuations over 10x revenues achieved in recent tech deals, companies sometimes overplay their tech credentials to get access to the higher multiples. Are these valuations underpinned by fundamentals and not by the latest buzzword? Any of you want to take that? Is it pinned by?
Well, let me put a comment. I think that, you know, there's pros and cons that starting a technology company is a lot easier now in Indonesia and Southeast Asia than ever before. And so, I mean, the obvious pros is that unleash new entrepreneur spirit, right, in the market. But the cons is that it is true, there are a bunch of companies out there that were traditional companies that's wearing the skin of a tech company now, trying to do what I call multiples arbitrage. But that's not the essence of a technology company. Or a true tech startup is to go for product market fit before you actually scale. And that's the key difference in these other companies who's trying to use this fake skin of a technology company, is that they actually scale first before they find product market fit. I would make that the key distinction of a true startup and one that is not.
Right, got it. Maybe Moses, one for you. The unicorn head spinning valuations, it's great headlines for people like me, media, people in the media. But should startups look into becoming more like a camel, resilient and cautious? This is an interesting one.
Yeah, that's such a fun analogy. I've never thought about startups as a camel. I think what's useful in that analogy is the idea of having a war chest for when the desert times comes, that you can survive it. We haven't seen that cycle too many times in Asia compared to the Valley. But I think some of the biggest companies in the world were ones that thrived during recessions, whether that's Amazon raised in '99, Google raised in 2000. Some of the biggest companies today, Okta did well in '08, Airbnb the same. So there's a lot of history where some of the biggest companies today are ones that were camels in the desert at the right time. So I think there's a point in time to think and be a camel, but there's also a point in time to run when things are looking great. I think maybe what inspires me here is Warren Buffett's idea of be greedy when others are fearful and fearful when others are greedy. So I think times like COVID have been a great time for startups because a lot of folks are fearful and being worried about the bottom line. And you've seen startups like Ajaib and others be super aggressive. We launched a new country during COVID. We got a whole bunch of new industries during COVID. And I think that's a right way for startups to be thinking is beyond the headlines. Hey, how do we serve customers every day? And given the systemic changes in society, what are the trends that we can jump on in terms of not self-serving, but to actually serve the nations that we live in and improve the economies that we belong to?
Got it. Another question: how should entrepreneurs try to adapt to the different stages of the valuation? Maybe Moses, you can answer this better than since you've been around for a longer time and gone through the various stages.
The various stages of valuation, I think it matters as much. There's a few dimensions here that matter. Stage matters, size matters, in which case Henderson and I are going through the same thing. Types of investors matter because depending on who you raise money from, the things they worry about are different. So how to adapt? A little bit of our story. I think most of we're lucky in that we're able to access money from around the world with investors from global, for Southeast Asian and from local. And so what we've seen there is a great balance in terms of the debate around what matters. So as the sizes have increased, the amount of governance and process expected increases. The change from kind of vanity metrics, let's call it, to fundamental metrics for us, like revenues or net profits, start to matter more as you get bigger. So I think that's the change that we've seen, and the adaptation simply means understanding the KPIs that matter now and managing the business to those. So that's what we've noticed.
Got it. Anderson, do you want to add?
Yeah, I think I agree with Moses. I think that the focus onto revenues and less of the top line metrics matters more and more in later stage. I would say that in earlier stage, product market fit is the one that's most important, right? And for most, like, product market fit is also characterized along with positive unit economics. And so being able to show at a small scale that you might be profitable one day is enough. But I think as you go to a more mature stage, it's about growth. Now, can you grow kind of your revenues? Can you grow your profit margins and things like that? Like, that shifts over time.
Got it. Got another question. Bukalapak shares are now about 20% lower than their first day closing price and lower than the IPO price. They are not alone. Many IPOs have not gone well for many unicorns globally. Does this indicate the unicorn valuations are too high to be justified by business performance? Anderson?
Well, who knows, right? I think that really depends on their long-term strategy, on what they think is important for the company. I wouldn't make a broad generalization based on a handful of companies who might be a bit more under the media spotlight, right? I think that the way I see this is I judge companies on its own merit. There are other companies as well that over the last few months, tech IPOs that has appreciated in value a lot. Does that mean that it will continue? Who knows, right? But I think in the end of the day, really depends on each company's fundamentals, each company's strategy going forward, what industries they're going to tackle next. So it really depends on each company, I would say.
All right, Moses, you want to add?
I'll just throw one example. If you look at Amazon's performance post IPO for the first little while, I think their stock price dropped by many percentage points. I want to say more than 50, but someone can fact check me if I'm wrong. But dang, I wish I invested when they were down. So I think it's hard to justify a point in time. It's hard to generalize across all. It's hard to do it at a point in time. If the team is right on execution and the opportunity is big enough, then maybe what we see in the first year is very different than what we see 10 years down the line.
Got it. Since we're talking about Bukalapak IPOs, why don't we talk about your guys' IPO? Is it in plans? And you're obviously unicorn status, and there's so much size the IDX can take. So maybe you guys looking at overseas markets. But what are your plans on IPOs going forward? And do you think you'll perform well once you do actually go public? Anderson.
Well, we're just starting out. We haven't really thought about that yet, honestly. We're just 1% through what we want to achieve. So for us, that might be a bit longer down the line.
Moses?
The way we think about it is just much like the valuation, the question of where money comes from, public markets or private markets, is both are options on the table. I don't know that it always makes sense immediately in the short run. I think for our business, there's tons that we need to build, and private markets are supporting that just fine. There's a point at which sometimes it may make sense. A lot of the reasons that people used to go public are now being solved by private markets: liquidity from investors, understanding how markets work for employees. A lot of those things are being dealt with. So I think for entrepreneurs, there's lots of choices. And as I mentioned before, you're speaking to two YC School of Thought folks. So we care a lot about building the business next month, next quarter, next year. And then the lagging indicators like an IPO or valuation can come down the line.
One thing you mentioned makes sense. The word that stuck to me there was make sense to go public. So when does it make sense for unicorns like you guys to go public? When do you make that decision?
That's unfortunate. I think the answer really is it depends. I was just speaking to a CEO that went public recently in the last year, and it made sense for them in that case because of a little bit of timing where they were in the investment cycle, to the way the public markets, and in this case, as U.S. public markets are supporting companies in their growth. I think C has demonstrated that really well, that public markets are really cheap right now. That's not always the case. That's not always true that retail markets are driving and that'll support that kind of growth. So there's a bunch of dimensions implied in there, a lot of it around timing. So that's why I use the word make sense, because it's a very personal decision. It's a very timing of the market. It's a very macro decision on when to go public. Right now, there's a lot of companies going public in mature markets like the US because the timing is right and the macro environment's right. 2009, less so.
When will it make sense for you and Xendit?
Unclear. I think the way I think about it, like really, we think about customers every single day, every single month. That's what we care about. We're 100% execution focused. What I rely on is advisors, investors, and those that have done the journey before to say, hey, now might be the right time. We've always relied on, we're lucky to have advisors who've built billion-dollar companies, IPO'd companies before, so they're able to kind of give us advice at the right time. For now, there's a very clear path that for us, at least, B2B digital infrastructure, the world is really young. Southeast Asia is really small so far. We know that won't be the case on a 30-year horizon, and we're here to build for the region over the next 30 years.
Anderson, maybe, as you said, it's a bit too early for Ajaib to think about IPO, but is there certain metrics that you're looking at? Maybe when certain metrics, when numbers hit certain metrics, you decide to do an IPO, or what's your thinking behind when the right time is?
Yeah, I agree. I tend to agree with Moses on this. I think it's a highly personal decision that's different from everyone. But one thing I can comment is that, Ajaib is, we stand for democratization of finance, right? So I think one of the other things that we're thinking about is also kind of the social responsibility aspect of having grown in a nation and participating in the gains of on the backs of retail investors. I think that at some point in time, there is a social responsibility to also allow the retail investors to participate in our growth and our gains as well, that we've benefited off the backs of the growth of the nation, right? I think that's one thing that's good for both sides, I think. But I think beyond that, we're still a young company. We're still, we were just born early 2019. It's still too early for us to start thinking about that right now. Similar to Moses, we're still like heads down, trying to realize our vision.
Got it. I think we're just out of time. I'm just checking if we haven't answered any questions. Oh, I think we've answered all the questions that have been posted. Maybe last question for you guys related to IPO. I mean, this obviously depends on company by company, but I've seen a lot of Indonesian founders talk about, wanting to list on the Indonesian stock exchange because, it's their home country and it's, they want to be closer to home. But obviously GoTo is trying to do dual listing. I think before Bukalapak IPO, there was talk about, lack of liquidity and lack of depth of the IDX, and hence Indonesian unicorns, especially the big tech companies, unicorns, they have to go to overseas markets to list. Is that changing, Anderson?
Yes, I actually would characterize that under myths. It is a myth. I think if we study the Brazilian stock exchange just 5 years earlier, it's no different than Indonesia, right? I think by the amount of IPOs, companies there, by the amount of liquidity, 5 years ago, it wasn't that different than Indonesia. And so we've seen such a healthy development of the Brazilian stock market over the last 5 years. That will also happen in Indonesia. And if at all, the Bukalapak mega IPO is one to prove that there is liquidity in the market, because they were oversubscribed. And when they did IPO, it was the largest IPO in Indonesia history. Actually, a couple of days ago, another emittent is aiming to break that record, right? And so, if at all, these IPOs are proving that it is a myth that there's lack of liquidity in the Indonesian market. We know, at least from the retail investors, there's a lot of demand for the Bukalapak IPO stocks. And we know as well that there's even more demand for several other tech companies that's about to IPO in the Indonesian market. But for us in Ajaib, we fully support folks also listing in the Indonesian stock exchange. We think there's a social responsibility aspect to it because they've benefited from the country, and they should allow retail investors in the country to also participate in their gains.
Moses?
Anderson knows the markets better than me, so I think that was a good recap. I think that logic is very sound. I think our markets the liquidity will increase. I think we're seeing those proof points. So when the time comes for us, the decisions will be easier.
Got it. Thanks a lot. With that, we'll conclude this session. Thank you, gentlemen, for your wonderful insights, and enjoy the rest of World Digital Asia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys.